Grace had taken the boys to the park, where their laughter filled the air as they played on the swings. Suddenly, a chill ran down her spine, a prickle of awareness that made her turn around. Her breath caught in her throat. Standing just a few feet away, watching the boys with an unreadable expression, was Ethan. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them. He looked different, older, sharper. His suit was perfectly tailored, his hair neatly combed back, but there was something in his eyes, something raw and vulnerable. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the next Soul Stories video. Today we bring you a touching story of motherhood. Let's begin. Grace Matthews stood before the full-length mirror, her wedding gown shimmering in the soft amber glow of the suite. She adjusted the lace veil for what felt like the 100th time, her movements growing increasingly hesitant. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. It was 11:30 a.m., and the ceremony was set to begin in just 30 minutes. Grace's heart raced with a blend of excitement, nerves, and love. Today she was supposed to become Mrs. Ethan Caldwell, the wife of the wealthiest man in Boston. It was meant to be perfect. Then the phone rang. Grace's heart skipped a beat as she turned to pick it up, a smile still lingering on her lips. "Hello," she answered softly, her voice trembling slightly. There was a pause, a long and heavy silence. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was cold and distant. "I'm not coming," he said. The words struck her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless and stunned. "What?" she whispered, disbelief dripping from the single word. "It's over," Ethan continued. "I can't go through with it. I need to focus on the company right now. You'll understand someday." The line went dead. The phone slipped from Grace's fingers, crashing to the floor as she stared blankly at her reflection. She was a bride without a groom, a love story without a happy ending. As the minutes ticked by, she realized this wasn't just the end of her relationship. It was the beginning of a battle she never anticipated. Her world shattered in that moment, leaving her adrift in a storm of grief and disbelief. The lavish hotel room, once a symbol of Ethan's wealth and status, now felt cold and empty. Alone, Grace was surrounded by the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of her life. Her vision blurred with unshed tears as she yanked off her veil and threw it aside. The delicate lace crumpled on the floor, a broken promise lying in ruins. In the days that followed, news of the wedding cancellation spread rapidly. Headlines blared about Ethan Caldwell's last-minute decision, painting Grace as the heartbroken fiancée left to pick up the pieces. Paparazzi hounded her, cameras capturing every moment of her sorrow as she left the penthouse they had once shared. But Grace refused to let herself crumble. Despite having no job, no connections, and nowhere to go, she packed her belongings and vanished from the high society world she had once inhabited. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. She found a small, rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was a far cry from the luxury she had grown accustomed to, but it was hers, free from Ethan's shadow. Then, about a month after the disastrous non-wedding, she sat in her tiny bathroom, staring at a small plastic stick. Her hands trembled as she watched a second line slowly appear. Pregnant. Her heart sank, and the initial shock quickly morphed into a whirlwind of emotions, panic, confusion, and even a glimmer of hope. She knew she couldn't call Ethan. She refused to. After the way he had abandoned her, walking away without so much as a backward glance, she couldn't let him back into her life. He didn't deserve to know. Yet as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Grace knew her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. Grace's tiny body was filled with life. 2 lives, it turned out. Twins. She could barely believe it when the doctor broke the news, his voice filled with amazement. "How did I do this?" she whispered one night, clutching her swollen belly as she sat alone in the dark room of her tiny apartment. But somehow she did. Grace didn't just survive, she thrived for her children. She worked 2 jobs, cobbling together a life for herself and her 2 precious miracles, Oliver, Owen. These boys filled her world with endless love and laughter. As the quadruplets grew, so did Grace's determination. Each milestone, every first word, every giggle, every unsteady step, only reinforced that she'd made the right choice. Ethan would never be a part of their lives. He didn't deserve to be. Yet the boys carried Ethan's legacy in their features, his piercing blue eyes and sandy blonde hair. Strangers on the street would often stop her to comment on how identical the boys looked, how striking their resemblance was. And every time Grace's heart would ache just a little, as if Ethan were there in every mischievous grin and playful glance. By the time the boys turned 3, Grace had found a rhythm. Her days were spent working at a small marketing firm, while her evenings were devoted to freelancing as a graphic designer, squeezing in work after her boys went to bed. Money was always tight, but she managed. She had no other choice. Then everything changed one sunny afternoon. Grace had taken the boys to the park, where their laughter filled the air as they played on the swings. Suddenly, a chill ran down her spine, a prickle of awareness that made her turn around. Her breath caught in her throat. Standing just a few feet away, watching the boys with an unreadable expression, was Ethan. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them. He looked different, older, sharper. His suit was perfectly tailored, his hair neatly combed back. But there was something in his eyes, something raw and vulnerable. "Grace," he murmured, taking a hesitant step forward. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking as she instinctively stepped in front of her boys, shielding them with her body. Ethan's gaze shifted to the two children. His face grew pale. "Are they?" He couldn't finish the question, but Grace saw the moment the truth dawned on him. His mouth fell open slightly, and for a fleeting moment, he looked utterly lost. "They're not yours," Grace lied, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. But she knew he wasn't convinced. She could see it in his eyes, in the way they flickered between her and the boys, noting every familiar feature. He took another step closer, his hands clenching at his sides. "Grace," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to know." He pleaded, his voice low and urgent. Are they mine?" She lifted her chin, fighting to keep her expression blank. "It doesn't matter, Ethan. You made your choice years ago. We don't need you." Then she turned, calling out to the boys in a bright, shaky voice. "Come on, guys, it's time to go home." They ran to her, their little hands reaching up to grab hers. Ethan stood frozen, his gaze following them as they walked away. As Grace glanced back over her shoulder, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Determination. He wasn't going to let them go. 2 weeks later, Ethan showed up again. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought a lawyer. Grace's heart sank as she read the papers he thrust into her hands. "Custody? You can't be serious," she whispered, staring up at him in disbelief. "I am," he replied quietly. "Grace, I made a mistake. I know that now. But those boys, they deserve to know who their father is. I deserve a chance to be part of their lives." Her hands shook as she crumpled the papers. "You don't get to walk back into my life after everything you've done. After abandoning us." "I never knew," he shot back, his voice breaking. "I never knew about them, Grace." "Because you never gave me a chance to tell you," she shouted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "You left, Ethan. You left me with nothing. No money, no home, and 2 babies to raise alone." He flinched, but his expression hardened. "I'm not leaving again." The next few months were a blur of courtrooms and lawyers. Ethan, true to his word, refused to back down. He showed up to every hearing, every meeting, fighting to prove he was serious about being in the boys' lives. Slowly, agonizingly, Grace began to believe him. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. As the tension between them simmered, Grace couldn't help but wonder, was he really here for the boys? Or was this just another one of his power plays? One evening, just as Grace started to let her guard down, a tall, elegant woman stepped out of Ethan's car, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Grace's blood ran cold as she recognized her. Isabella, Ethan's fiancée. But why was she here, smiling down at Grace's children as if they were part of her perfect future? "Hello, Grace," Isabella purred. "I hear we have some things to discuss." Grace's heart pounded as Isabella's cool smile settled on her. She looked as flawless as ever, dressed in a designer coat, her hair immaculately styled, and that same aura of confidence radiating off her. It felt like stepping into a nightmare, one she had thought she'd escaped when Ethan left her standing alone in that hotel room all those years ago. "What are you doing here?" Grace kept her voice low, careful not to let the boys playing a few feet away overhear. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Isabella tilted her head with an amused expression. "Isn't it obvious?" she replied, glancing at Ethan. Her expression softened as she linked her arm through his. "We're going to be a family," she announced. "It is valuable for us to subscribe to the channel so that we have more motivation to create more videos. Let's continue the story." Grace's stomach twisted in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" she asked again, her voice tight with anxiety. Isabella spoke with a calm, almost condescending tone. "We're getting married," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if those words didn't cut Grace to the core. "Ethan and I want to make sure these little ones are part of our lives." The implication of our lives, our family, hung in the air. "They're not yours," Grace shot back, her voice trembling with barely controlled rage. "You have no right." "Actually, we do," Isabella interrupted, her voice silky smooth. "Ethan is their father, and as his wife, I'll be, well, I guess you could call me their stepmother." Grace felt her world tilting. How was this happening? She had thought that Ethan reappearing in their lives would be challenge enough, but now Isabella was here, twisting the knife even deeper. "You're not their mother," Grace spat, struggling to keep her composure. "You will never be their mother." Isabella's smile widened. "No, I suppose not," she said unfazed, "but I'll be in their lives whether you like it or not." Ethan, who had remained silent until now, took a step forward, his gaze steady and fixed on Grace. "We want to make this work, Grace," he said, "for the boys." The audacity of his words sent a rush of anger through her. She had spent the last 3 years struggling, scraping by to give her children the best life possible. And now Ethan thought he could waltz back in with his fiancée and pretend to take over. "You can't just come back and decide to play house with my sons," she hissed, her eyes blazing. "Our sons," Ethan corrected softly, "and I'm not going anywhere." Grace stared at him, hating the way her heart twisted at the look in his eyes. The same look he used to give her when they were younger, when he made promises she had foolishly believed. "Please, Grace," he murmured. "Let's talk about this. I want to be in their lives." She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. "You can be in their lives," she said, her voice low but firm, "but on my terms, not hers." Isabella's smile faltered, her eyes darkening with anger. "That's not for you to decide," she snapped. Grace's gaze never wavered from Ethan. "Yes, it is," she said firmly, "because I'm the one who's been here. I'm the one who's raised them. I'm the one they call mommy when they're sick or scared." Isabella opened her mouth to argue, but Ethan placed a hand on her arm, silencing her. He turned back to Grace, his expression conflicted. "I just want a chance," he whispered. "Please." Grace swallowed hard, her anger battling with something softer, something more vulnerable. She didn't trust him, not yet, but the boys deserved to know their father, and deep down, a small, fragile part of her wanted to believe that Ethan had changed. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice tight. "But you don't get to make demands, not after what you did." Ethan nodded slowly, relief washing over his face. "Thank you," he said. Isabella, however, was furious. "You can't be serious, Ethan. She's trying to control everything," she protested. "That's enough, Isabella," Ethan said sharply, his eyes flashing with resolve. Grace watched as Isabella's face twisted with anger, but Isabella said nothing. Instead, she spun on her heel and strode back to the car, her movements sharp and filled with frustration. Ethan lingered for a moment, his eyes still fixed on Grace. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "I want to do right by them." Then he turned and followed Isabella, leaving Grace standing alone once more. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Isabella's victorious smirk, as if she had already won. Grace knew this fight wasn't just about the boys, it was about power and control. Isabella wanted to put her in her place, to remind her who Ethan truly belonged to, but Grace refused to let that happen. The next morning, she called her lawyer. Their conversation was long and tense, going over every possible option and scenario. By the time they hung up, Grace was emotionally drained, but her determination had only strengthened. She would fight for her boys no matter what it took. 2 weeks later, the first custody hearing arrived. Grace showed up early at the courthouse, her heart pounding. Ethan was already there, looking tense but resolute. Beside him, like a menacing shadow, stood Isabella. The hearing was brutal. Isabella's lawyer painted Grace as an unfit mother, highlighting every struggle she had faced and every mistake she had made. They criticized her for her low income, her small apartment, and her lack of family support. "It's clear that Miss Matthews is not providing these children with the life they deserve," the lawyer drawled, his voice dripping with disdain. "Mr. Caldwell, on the other hand, can offer them stability, security, and a loving home." Grace clenched her fists under the table, anger boiling inside her. How dare they judge her for doing her best, for sacrificing everything she had, while Ethan had never even lifted a finger to help? But then her lawyer stood up, his voice steady and calm. "Miss Matthews has raised these boys on her own for the past 3 years," he said. "She has been their sole caregiver, their source of love and comfort. Despite her circumstances, she has never asked Mr. Caldwell for help. She has provided for them to the best of her ability, and they are happy, healthy, and deeply loved." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes dropping to the table. Grace's heart ached as she watched him, torn between wanting him to understand and wanting him to feel the pain she had endured. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, listened intently to both sides. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing as she addressed Grace. "Miss Matthews," she said, her voice measured, "I'm inclined to believe that you are a good mother. But I also believe that children deserve to know both of their parents if it's in their best interest. Are you willing to work with Mr. Caldwell to create a shared custody arrangement?" Grace swallowed hard, her eyes flicking to Ethan. His expression was open, almost pleading. He looked different, not like the cold, distant man who had left her, but like the Ethan she used to know. Slowly she nodded. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied. Ethan's shoulders sagged with relief, and for a fleeting moment, Grace allowed herself to hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe they could find a way to co-parent, if nothing else. But as she turned to leave, Isabella stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, her eyes burning with hatred. "I will destroy you, Grace. Mark my words." Grace stared back at her, the initial shock giving way to a slow, simmering anger. "You can try," she whispered, her voice steady, "but I won't let you take my boys." As she walked away, one thing was certain to Grace. The real fight was just beginning. The following weeks were a whirlwind of chaos, stress, and uncertainty. The boys, too young to understand the intricacies of the custody arrangement, knew only that they suddenly had a father in their lives, a stranger who looked just like them. Ethan tried, Grace had to admit. He picked them up every weekend, took them to the zoo, sports games, and amusement parks. He tried to learn about the things they loved. Owen's love of drawing, and Oliver's fascination with numbers and puzzles. But no matter how hard he tried, there was always an undercurrent of awkwardness, a stiffness in his interactions that the boys sensed. Each time Grace watched Ethan struggle to connect with them, a small part of her still felt that same sharp sting of betrayal. "I'm their father," he told her one evening as he dropped the boys off. His voice was soft but firm. "They deserve to know me." "I know," Grace replied, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "But they're confused, Ethan. You can't just walk into their lives and expect them to accept you right away." His expression tightened. "What do you want me to do, Grace?" "I'm doing everything I can." "Be patient," she whispered, glancing over at the boys who were completely absorbed in building a block tower on the living room floor. "And for God's sake, get Isabella out of the picture. She's confusing them even more." Ethan's face hardened. "Isabella is my fiancée. She's going to be part of their lives, whether you like it or not." The words cut deep, and Grace struggled to keep her expression neutral. "You're going to have to choose, Ethan," she said quietly, "between making your fiancée happy and doing what's best for our sons." He stared at her, a flicker of regret crossing his eyes, but then he turned away, shaking his head. "I'm not choosing," he murmured. "I'll make it work." Grace knew better. Isabella was a ticking time bomb, and it was only a matter of time before she went off. It happened on a rainy Friday evening. Grace was rushing to get the boys ready for Ethan's weekend visitation. Their little rain boots were scattered across the floor as they struggled into their Oliverets. There was a knock at the door, and when Grace opened it, she found Isabella standing there. She was dressed in a pristine white trench coat, holding an umbrella over her head. "Where's Ethan?" Grace asked, her voice wary. "He's not coming," Isabella replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "He asked me to pick up the boys today." Grace stiffened, her eyes darting to her sons, who froze at the sight of Isabella. Oliver took a step back, gripping Owen's arm. "No," Grace said firmly. "You're not taking them." Isabella's eyes narrowed. "I'm not asking for your permission, Miss Grace." Grace squared her shoulders, blocking Isabella's path. "Get out of my house." "You think you can keep me out of their lives forever?" Isabella spat, her face twisting with anger. "I'm going to be their stepmother. They will be part of my family." "No, they won't," Grace retorted, her voice unwavering. "Because they're my family, and I'm not going to let you manipulate Ethan into—" "That's rich coming from you," Isabella sneered. "You think you can just dangle these kids in front of him and make him forget about me? About us? Ethan and I are getting married, and when we do, I'll make sure you never get another penny of his money." The accusation left Grace momentarily speechless. She had never asked for money, not when she was pregnant and not after the boys were born. The very thought that she would use her children for leverage made her blood boil. "This isn't about money," Grace said, her voice trembling with controlled fury. "This is about what's best for the boys, and what's best is for you to stay away from them." Isabella's lips curled into a cold smile. "You don't get it, do you? You're going to lose. Ethan will realize that I'm the only one who cares about his future, our future, and when he does, he'll take those boys away from you." "Over my dead body," Grace whispered. Isabella's smile widened. "That can be arranged." Before Grace could respond, a cry came from behind her. She turned quickly to see Oliver, his small face crumpling as he stared up at Isabella. "Go away," he shouted, his voice high and shrill. "You're mean. I don't like you." Grace reached out for him, but Oliver had already darted toward his brothers, tears streaming down his cheeks. Isabella's smile vanished, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You little—" "Leave," Grace said, stepping between Isabella and the boys. "Now." For a tense moment, they stood there, the air thick with animosity. Then, with a dramatic toss of her hair, Isabella turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Grace let out a shaky breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She knelt down, gathering the boys into her arms and holding them close as they trembled against her. "It's okay, babies," she whispered, stroking their hair. "Mommy's here. Mommy's got you." But as she cradled her sons, a single, terrifying thought lodged itself in her mind. Isabella wasn't going to stop, and Grace wasn't sure she could protect her boys from whatever was coming next. Ethan knew something was wrong the moment he stepped into his penthouse that night. The lights were off, and the air was heavy with tension. Isabella sat on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, her expression icy. "What's going on?" he asked, shrugging off his coat. "Where were you?" she demanded, her voice tight with barely restrained anger. "I had a meeting," he replied slowly. "I thought I told you." "You didn't tell me anything," she snapped, "and I had to go pick up your kids like some kind of errand girl." Ethan frowned. "You went to Grace's?" "Yes, I went to Grace's," Isabella said, her voice rising. "Because you didn't show up. I had to stand there and listen to her tell me I'm not welcome in their lives. I had to watch that little brat scream at me like I was some kind of monster." "Isabella, calm down," Ethan murmured, holding up his hands defensively. "They're just kids. They don't understand." "They don't understand because you won't let me be part of their lives," she shouted, jumping to her feet. "You let her push me out, Ethan. You're letting her win." "Win," he repeated, his voice incredulous. "This isn't a game, Isabella. Those are my sons." "And what am I?" she hissed, her eyes blazing. "Just a placeholder? Just someone to keep your bed warm until you decide you want to play daddy?" "Isabella, stop," he said sharply. "This isn't about you. It's about them." "No, Ethan," she whispered, stepping closer, her gaze dark and dangerous. "It's about us. And if you don't make a decision soon, you're going to lose me for good." He stared at her, his heart pounding. He loved Isabella, he did. But the boys, they were his flesh and blood. They were innocent in all of this, caught in a tug-of-war they didn't deserve. "I can't walk away from them," he said softly. "Not again. Isabella's face twisted with rage. She threw her glass at the wall, the shattering sound echoing through the empty penthouse. "Fine," she spat, "but don't come crying to me when she takes everything." Then she was gone, slamming the door behind her, leaving Ethan standing alone in the dark. The custody battle raged on for months, wearing Grace down little by little. Every time she walked into that courtroom, she braced herself for another attack, another attempt by Isabella's lawyer to paint her as an unfit mother. But no matter how hard they tried, Grace stood her ground, refusing to be bullied or intimidated. Ethan, torn between his love for his sons and his crumbling relationship with Isabella, tried to play peacemaker. He assured Grace over and over that he wanted what was best for the boys. But his actions, showing up late for visitations, missing important milestones, told a different story. Then one day, everything changed. It was a sunny afternoon when Grace received an unexpected call from her lawyer. "Isabella has filed for full custody," her lawyer said. Grace's hand tightened around the phone. "Isabella? Not Ethan." "Yes, Isabella," her lawyer replied grimly. "She's claiming that you're emotionally unstable and that the boys would be better off living with Ethan and her." The audacity of it left Grace speechless. "She can't do that, can she?" Grace whispered, her voice shaking. "She's not even their mother." "No, she can't," her lawyer reassured her. "But she's trying to use her influence and wealth to sway the judge. We need to prepare for the worst." The next hearing was a blur. Grace sat in stunned silence as Isabella's lawyer laid out their case, twisting every detail of her life into something ugly and dangerous. They argued that Grace's refusal to let Isabella be part of the boys' lives was damaging, that she was poisoning them against their father and his new fiancé. Grace's heart pounded as she listened, her gaze darting to Ethan. He looked miserable, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't agree with any of it. She knew that. But he didn't speak up. He didn't defend her. He just sat there, letting Isabella tear her apart. And that was when Grace realized something. Ethan would never change. He was weak, too afraid of losing Isabella to do what was right. He would let her destroy Grace if it meant keeping his relationship intact. But Grace wasn't weak. She wasn't going to let them take her sons. When it was her turn to speak, Grace stood, her voice steady and clear, as she spoke about the boys, their unique personalities, their dreams, and the way they laughed together every night before bed. She described the sacrifices she had made, the love and care she had poured into raising them, and the life she had built for them on her own. "I'm not perfect," she said softly, looking directly at Ethan. "But I love my children more than anything, and I will fight for them until my last breath." The room fell silent. The judge watched her intently for a moment before turning to Ethan. "Mr. Caldwell," she asked sharply, "do you support your fiancé's petition for full custody?" Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. "What?" he stammered. The judge repeated herself, her voice firm. "Do you believe that your fiancé should have more say over your children than their mother?" Ethan looked between Isabella, who was glaring at him with fury, and Grace, who stood tall and unwavering. Slowly he shook his head. "No," he whispered. "I don't." Isabella's face twisted with anger. "Ethan, you can't," she protested. "I'm sorry, Isabella," he said softly, "but this is wrong." The judge nodded, her gaze returning to Grace. "I believe you, Ms. Matthews," she said. "Your children are lucky to have such a strong, dedicated mother." And just like that, the nightmare was over. Isabella stormed out of the courthouse, her plans shattered. She and Ethan broke up soon after, their engagement crumbling under the weight of bitterness and resentment. Without Isabella's influence, Ethan agreed to a much smaller custody arrangement. Weekend visits, supervised at first until the boys felt comfortable enough to spend more time with him. Grace took things day by day, slowly learning to trust him again. Not as a partner, but as a father to their sons. He tried harder and made more of an effort. As the months passed, the boys began to look forward to their weekends with him. But the scars ran deep, and it would take time, years perhaps, for the wounds to fully heal. Grace knew that, and she also knew that Ethan would never truly be part of their family in the way she and the boys were. But that was okay. She had won. She had fought for her children and for herself, and she had come out stronger. One evening, as she tucked the boys into bed, Oliver looked up at her with serious blue eyes. "Mommy," he whispered, "is Daddy going to come back?" Grace's heart tightened. She knelt beside his bed, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "He's always going to be your daddy, sweetheart," she murmured. "But he's not coming back to live with us, no." Oliver nodded slowly, his little brow furrowing. "That's okay," he said finally, "because we have you." Grace smiled, her heart swelling with love. "Yes, you do," she whispered. "You always will." As she turned off the light and quietly left the room, a sense of peace settled over her. The battle was over. The pain and betrayal were behind her now. She and her boys were finally free. Years passed, and the boys grew up happy and healthy, thriving in the small but warm home Grace had built for them. Ethan remained a part of their lives, though distant, more of a visitor than a father figure. He eventually remarried, but it was evident that Grace and the boys were never far from his mind. As for Grace, she had moved on with her life. She focused on her career, her family, and the world she had built for herself. She launched her own business, a small marketing firm that quickly earned a reputation for its integrity and creativity. Though she dated a few men, none ever filled the void Ethan had left, but she had made peace with that. One sunny afternoon, Grace stood at the edge of the soccer field, watching Oliver sprint across the grass, his face glowing with excitement. Beside her, Owen cheered him on, their voices mingling with the roar of the crowd. For the first time in a long time, Grace felt truly fulfilled and whole. She had fought, lost and won, broken and rebuilt, and in the end, she had found something even more valuable than what she had lost: peace, strength, and a future filled with hope. As the boys ran toward her, their faces flushed with joy, Grace smiled and opened her arms wide. Because this love, this family, was everything she had ever needed. Grace's story is one of resilience, strength, and the fierce love of a mother determined to protect her children from heartbreak and betrayal. Through a grueling custody battle and ultimate triumph, Grace never gave up on herself or her sons. Despite Ethan's abandonment and Vivian's cruel attempts to tear her family apart, Grace proved that true strength comes from within, and that no amount of wealth or power can ever replace a mother's love. I truly hope you enjoyed the story. I'm sure the next video appearing on your screen will also touch your heart. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming videos. Sending you a big kiss, and see you in the next story.